In 1990, Nintendo released its long-awaited follow-up to the insanely successful NES. But how did a 16-bit console, released just before the 32-bit era, make its way to being the 16th highest-selling console of all time as of 2025? And how did its success make the development of a 32-bit console unnecessary? My name's Dylan, and today in our continuing series on the history of Nintendo, we're going to take a look at one of my favorite consoles, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super NES for short, or if you're really pretentious, SNES. In my last Nintendo video, I talked about the creation and success of the Game Boy, and you can watch that video, I think here, usually where it pops up or here. However, that was a handheld console, and consumers were eager for a new home console from Nintendo. And this is where Nintendo's rivalry with Sega truly heated up, and I mean, who doesn't love a good rivalry? If you remember from my NES video, which you can watch here, I forget where the info things pop up. But if you watch that video, you'll know that Super Mario Bros. 3 for the Famicom was released in 1988 and later in 1990 for the NES, and was the fastest selling game in history at that time. So it's understandable why Nintendo wasn't eager to update the NES. It was still massively successful. However, that same year, exactly 1 week later to be exact, Sega released the Mega Drive in Japan. It would be released as the Genesis in North America the following year.
Planet Earth, a scientist creates the ultimate machine.
At last!
A machine that will give him the power to journey into the Mega World. With thousands of colors, 16-bit graphic technology, and 10-channel Mega Stereo sound. The most advanced video game system in the universe.
Yes!
Mega Drive from Sega.
The Sega Genesis offered 16-bit graphics, leagues above the 8-bit capabilities of the NES. Now, the Genesis, or Mega Drive, was not Sega's first home console. That title goes to the SG-1000, and if you've never heard of that console, there's a reason for that. First, it was only released in Japan and Australia. And second, it was released on July 15th, 1983, which is important because that is the same exact day as the Famicom. And it was outsold by the Famicom at a rate of 10 to 1. 2 years later, Sega followed up this disappointment of a console with another stinker, the Master System, which saw a North American and European release in 1986. With Nintendo's dominance in the North American and Japanese markets, Sega needed a new beginning. A Genesis, if you will. Sega was the master of arcade machines, and when NEC Home Electronics released their 16-bit PC engine in 1987, Sega knew they needed to take their 8-bit arcade technologies and put them into a home console, and thus the Mega Drive was born. In 1987, in what was seen as an attempt to deter sales of the PC engine, Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi announced the development of a Super Famicom. It was demoed for the Japanese press in 1988. In 1990, Sega began targeting Nintendo in their official marketing with the popular slogan, "Sega does what Nintendon't," or "Genesis does what Nintendon't," as it was rebranded in North America.
Genesis does!
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo! Genesis does!
16-bit sports action.
You can't do this on Nintendo! Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does!
Get Joe Montana free, Pat Riley free, Buster Douglas free, Super Monaco GP free, or Collins free.
Genesis does!
What Nintendon't.
Buy a 16-bit Genesis system between now and October 31st and get an extra game.
Sega marketed their consoles towards teens, claiming that Nintendo was for kids, and the Genesis was not only more powerful than the still popular NES, but more sophisticated as well. Designed by Masayuki Uemura, the designer of the original Famicom, the Super Famicom was released in Japan on Wednesday, November 21st, 1990, for 25,000 yen, which is equivalent to 27,804 yen in 2019. It was an instant success. Nintendo's initial shipment of 300,000 units sold out within hours, and the resulting social disturbance led the Japanese government to ask video game manufacturers to schedule future console releases on weekends.
Konnichiwa, konnichiwa, Super Famicom. Konnichiwa, Mario Konnichiwa, konnichiwa, Mario の国から。お尻に火がつく面白さ、スーパーマリオブラザーズ4、スーパーファミコンでついに登場。
The immense popularity of this new console caught the attention of the infamous Yakuza, a dangerous crime syndicate in Japan that actually played a role in Nintendo's success as a trading card company in the 19th century. But now they were a threat to their success as a video game company. Nintendo's fear was that the Yakuza would intercept shipments of Super Famicoms and sell them on the black market for exuberant prices. So Nintendo shipped their new consoles at night to minimize the risk of theft. The Super Famicom quickly outsold its competition and reclaimed its rightful place atop the Japanese video game market, and following its 1991 release in North America as the Super NES, saw similar success. While the Genesis failed to seriously compete with the Super NES, Sega did force Nintendo to end a long-time practice. The Nintendo seal of quality that became so famous during the NES era still existed under the Super NES era, but the process to receive one of these seals changed.
Want to unlock a world of wonder and excitement? This is the key, the Nintendo Quality Seal. The seal assures you the best games, the best graphics, the best accessories. Without the seal, it's not Nintendo.
Oversaturation in the video game market led Nintendo to have strict rules when it came to the games released for its console. Any second party that wanted to make a game for NES had to get approval from Nintendo, as well as sign an exclusivity deal with Nintendo that stated the company could not release more than 5 games per year, and they had to wait 2 years before releasing their game for another console. And Nintendo was the sole manufacturer and distributor of the cartridges. Nintendo did continue to carefully evaluate the games released for the Super NES, using a 40-point scale to determine how to allocate marketing resources. Nintendo maintained a strict policy on the depiction of violence. People who grew up with the Sega Genesis may know of a cheat code for Mortal Kombat that allowed blood. Well, this was to comply with Nintendo's policy while still giving consumers the violent, bloody game that they were looking for. In 1993, a congressional hearing was convened on violence in video games. I covered lawmaker involvement in the regulations of video games in this video, but if you want a full video essay on Congress's response to violent video games and how the 1993 hearing led to the creation of ESRB ratings, let me know in the comments below. So at launch, the Super Famicom was released with few games. But notable releases were Super Mario World and F-Zero, 2 very successful games. The Super NES, which launched bundled with Super Mario World, added to this lineup with SimCity and a few other games. The Super NES was incredibly successful, selling more than 20 million units in the US alone. It is reported that the Super NES outsold the Sega Genesis by 1.5 million units. The mid-1990s saw the launch of the 32-bit era, with Sega's 32-bit console, the Sega Saturn, 3DO's interactive multiplayer, and eventually the Sony PlayStation. One company notably absent from the 32-bit disc-based era was Nintendo. Nintendo's graphics of the Super NES rivaled those of the 32-bit era, making a Nintendo 32-bit console pointless. This was further proven by the release of Donkey Kong Country in 1994. In the last 45 days of 1994, 6.1 million copies were sold, making it the fastest-selling video game in history to that date. This game conveyed that early 32-bit systems had little to offer over the Super NES, and primed the market for the more advanced consoles of the near future. According to TRSTS reports, 2 of the top 5 best-selling games in the US for December of 1996 were Super NES games. Nintendo ceased production of the Super NES in North America in 1999, about 2 years after releasing Kirby's Dream Land 3, which was its final second-party game in the US, and a full year after releasing Frogger, which was its final third-party game in the US. In Japan, Nintendo continued productions of both the Family Computer and the Super Famicom until September 25th, 2003, and new games were being produced until the year 2000, ending with the release of Metal Slater Glory Director's Cut on November 29th, 2000. Of course, the ever-so innovative Nintendo didn't leave the 32-bit era without pushing out something. In 1991, Sega announced the Sega VR, the first home virtual reality console. This would never see the light of day, but Nintendo believed they had the upper hand with the release of the Nintendo Virtual Boy in 1995. But just how successful was the Virtual Boy? We'll discuss that in my next video, so make sure to subscribe and click that bell so you don't miss it. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button. It helps this channel a lot. I'll see you guys in my next video. Okay, bye.